You are standing in your garage at 11 at night, phone flashlight pointed at the trade-in estimate on the Sealer's app, looking at a number that is $48,000 lower than what you paid 3 years ago for the vehicle parked 6 feet from you. The car still drives perfectly. The leather still smells the way it did in the showroom, and the number on the screen does not care about any of that. You bought something that was supposed to say you had arrived. Tonight, it is just telling you how much that sentence cost. I am going to show you the actual mechanism behind that number and why it was never really about the car. The belief that got you here is reasonable, even responsible sounding. You worked for this. You earn a high income, you pay your obligations on time, and you decided that a portion of that income should go toward things that reflect the level you have reached. Buy quality and it holds its value. The logic goes, buy the version of the watch, the bag, the car, the renovation that signals competence, and you are not wasting money. You are investing in how the world reads you, and how the world reads you affects what doors open. There is also a softer version of the belief, the one that says you deserve this. After years of saving, postponing, and making the careful choice, the status purchase becomes a kind of receipt for restraint. It feels less like spending and more like collecting on a debt you owed yourself. Financial advisors rarely argue hard against this, because the people who buy at this level are usually current on their obligations elsewhere. The household budget has room. The purchase does not trigger any of the warning signs that typically accompany financial trouble. It looks, by every visible metric, like a person managing money well and choosing to enjoy some of it. That is what makes the belief durable. It is not naive. It is built on real income, real discipline, and a reasonable read of what status purchases are supposed to do, which is to convert money into something that lasts and something that signals. Nobody is lying to you when they tell you a Porsche holds its value better than an economy sedan, or that a rare Birkin can appreciate while a fast fashion bag becomes landfill within a season. Those facts are true at the extreme edges of the luxury market, and the marketing built around those edges borrows their credibility for everything underneath them. You are not buying the asset that holds value. You are buying the category that contains the asset that holds value, and quietly assuming the category protects you. The crack does not usually appear at the moment of purchase. It appears later, when something forces you to convert the status object back into liquid money, and the number that comes back does not match the story you were telling yourself. For Marcus, that moment was not the SUV depreciating on a screen he checked voluntarily. It was the 6 months his father needed full-time care after a stroke, and the calculation that followed. Could he take an unpaid leave to manage it? The fixed monthly obligations on the vehicle, a home renovation, and a watch acquired the same way over the prior 4 years added up to just over $3,800 a month before a single ordinary expense was paid. That number did not move because his father got sick. It had been fixed in place years earlier by decisions that each felt, individually, completely reasonable. He could not take the unpaid leave, not because he lacked the income to survive a few months without pay in theory, but because the income had already been claimed by commitments tied to objects that, when he checked, were now worth a fraction of what he had paid for them. The wound here is specific. It is not that luxury spending is wasteful in some abstract moral sense. It is that the purchases that were supposed to represent freedom, the proof that he had made it, had quietly converted into the exact thing, preventing him from making the one decision that actually mattered. He sat with the math twice, hoping the second pass would produce a different number. It did not. The spreadsheet did not care that the SUV had felt like an achievement when he signed for it, or that the renovation had been, by any reasonable standard, tasteful and well executed. It only tracked what those decisions cost every month against what was available to spend. The gap between the two was the entire problem, and it had been sitting there for 3 years before his father's diagnosis gave it a deadline. The mechanism here is not overspending. Overspending is a symptom anyone can diagnose by glancing at a bank statement. What is happening underneath it is a status optionality trade-off, and it runs through almost every purchase in this category. Whether the item is a car, a handbag, a watch, or a kitchen renovation chosen for how it photographs rather than how it functions. Trace it back far enough, and the logic was named over a century ago. In 1899, the economist Thorstein Veblen described a category of spending whose purpose was not consumption in the ordinary sense but display. Purchases made specifically because they were visible and because their cost was legible to other people. Veblen called it conspicuous consumption, and the core insight has not aged. Certain goods are valuable to buyers precisely because they are expensive, not despite it. A version of the same handbag at a third of the price end, made from materials that perform identically, does not produce the same effect because the effect was never really about the leather. What has changed since 1899 is the financial architecture wrapped around that impulse. Modern status goods are priced and marketed to extract two payments from the same purchase. The first payment happens at the register, capturing the signaling value while it is fresh. The second payment continues every month afterward, in financing costs, insurance, maintenance, and the opportunity cost of capital tied up in an asset depreciating quietly in the background while it keeps doing its social job in the foreground. You are not buying one thing. You are buying a status premium and a financial commitment, bundled together and priced as if they were the same transaction, when in practice the premium evaporates almost immediately and the commitment remains. The numbers on that evaporation are not subtle once you look at them directly. Luxury vehicles typically lose between 15 and 25% of their value in the first year alone, and by the third year the cumulative loss on many models reaches roughly 50%, a steeper curve than mass-market vehicles experience over the same window. Designer handbags follow a similar pattern outside a narrow set of iconic exceptions. Most lose around 30% of retail value the moment they leave the store, regardless of how carefully they are maintained afterward. The premium you paid for visibility is front-loaded and brief. The commitment you signed is not. Who profits from that mismatch is not a mystery, and naming them is not an accusation of malice, it is a description of incentive. Manufacturers capture the signaling premium at the point of sale, which is why the marketing for status goods emphasizes scarcity, craftsmanship, and exclusivity rather than utility. Financing arms and lenders capture a second layer of profit on the commitment itself, structuring loans against depreciating assets in ways that frequently leave the buyer owing more than the item is worth for a meaningful stretch of the loan term. Resale and consignment platforms profit a third time when the original buyer eventually needs liquidity and discovers exactly how much of the original price was premium rather than asset. There is research that quantifies what this does at the household level rather than the individual purchase level. A study of consumer transaction data in Singapore compared households living private condominiums, a recognized status good in that market, against income-matched households in public housing. The condominium residents spent 25% more on visibly conspicuous goods, despite no measurable difference in income or broader socioeconomic profile. They also carried 7% more credit card debt than their matched counterparts, and 108% more delinquent credit card debt. That second number is the one worth sitting with. It is not that status-oriented households spend slightly more. It is that the debt produced by status spending is disproportionately the debt that does not get paid on time, which means it is disproportionately the debt that compounds against you. There is a second-order effect worth naming separately. Because the status purchase is typically financed against future income rather than paid from savings, it does not just consume monthly cash flow, it also defines a floor below which lifestyle cannot easily drop without a visible, public downgrade, the very thing the purchase was meant to prevent. This is part of why status spending entrenches rather than simply costs. Selling the asset to recover the optionality means absorbing the depreciation loss outright, which most owners are reluctant to do, and it means the dual payment structure, both the financing cost and the optionality cost, frequently continues for the full length of ownership rather than ending early. This is where the mechanism earns its name. Every status purchase financed this way does two things simultaneously. It buys a brief, real signaling effect, and it removes a portion of your future optionality, your capacity to redirect money towards something you have not yet anticipated needing, without first renegotiating commitments you already made. The signaling effect fades in months. The optionality cost does not announce itself until the moment you need the flexibility and discover it is already spoken for. Hold on to that word. It is going to matter again before this ends. Marcus Webb is 41, a marketing director with a combined household income of $145,000, married with 2 children in elementary school, living in a 4-bedroom house in a suburb chosen specifically for its school district and its visible curb appeal. The emotional state underneath the numbers is what he privately calls, only to himself, performed stability, the sense that everything about his life has to look finished, even while parts of it are still being financed. The decision that built the floor came 3 years before his father's stroke. At 38, with a recent promotion and a bonus that made the math feel comfortable, he financed Stats a $94,000 SUV over 6 years. The conventional wisdom he leaned on was straightforward and, on paper, defensible. Buy the reliable luxury brand, keep it 5 to 7 years. Let the monthly payment fit comfortably inside the budget, and treat the purchase as a reward that also functions as a long-term asset, since luxury vehicles are widely understood to hold value better than economy models. His wife, Dana, had raised a version of this question when the financing was signed, asking whether a 5-year-old model with 30,000 fewer miles might do the same job for half the monthly commitment. Marcus remembers agreeing the math made sense and buying the new one anyway, telling her and himself that the difference would matter for resale later. It did not. The 5-year-old model she had pointed to would have already depreciated past its steepest curve, while the one he bought was still mid-collapse 3 years in. He does not bring this up with her now. The asymmetry of who was right is not a conversation either of them has needed to have out loud, which is its own quiet kind of cost. The reality that contradicted his original logic arrived in 2 stages. The first was financial and came early. By the 3-year mark, the trade-in estimate sat at roughly $46,000, a loss of $48,000 on a $94,000 purchase, slightly steeper than the brand's marketing materials had implied, but not shocking enough on its own to register as a crisis. He noted it, felt a flicker of irritation, and moved on, because the car still worked and the payment still fit. The second stage was not financial at first. It was his father's stroke, and the 6 months of full-time care that followed, managed at a distance through a rotation of relatives, because Marcus could not take the unpaid leave his employer offered. The moment of understanding arrived during the second pass through his own budget, the one he ran specifically to check whether the first pass had made a mistake. It had not. The SUV payment, the home renovation completed 2 years earlier, and the watch purchase to mark the promotion together claimed just over $3,800 a month in fixed obligations. Money that had already been spent in spirit years before his father got sick, on objects now worth a fraction of what they cost, and on debt that did not care what was happening 4 states away. He did not sell the SUV. He ran the numbers on doing so and found that absorbing the depreciation loss outright, on top of the remaining loan balance, would not free up enough monthly cash to materially change the leave decision, only enough to make the math marginally less brutal. He extended a personal leave by using paid time off in fragments instead, missing the window where his presence would have mattered most, and he has not, as of this writing, changed anything about the underlying spending pattern. The reflection he has been left with is not regret in the dramatic sense. It is quieter than that, closer to recognition. The purchases had not made him less free in any way he could feel day to day, right up until the day they did, and by then the cost of reversing course was higher than the cost of simply living inside the constraint. Picture Hypothetically, a cohort of professional households earning between $120,000 and $200,000 a year. The bracket most often targeted by status purchase marketing because it is high enough to make the spending feel affordable and not yet high enough to make it financially irrelevant. If even a third of that cohort carries a Marcus-shaped floor, $3,000 to $4,000 a month, committed to financed status objects depreciating faster than the debt against them, clears, the aggregate effect is not a collection of individual bad decisions. It is a structural feature of how this income bracket experiences financial life, one where the appearance of comfort and the absence of optionality coexist in the same household, often for years, without either the household or anyone observing it from outside recognizing the gap. This is consistent with what the broader research on conspicuous consumption and debt describes at scale, not as an exception, but as a pattern. Households motivated by status concerns do not just spend more, they borrow more frequently to fund that spending, and the borrowing compounds in ways ordinary consumption debt does not, because the underlying asset offers no offsetting value if it has to be liquidated. A car loan against a depreciating asset and a renovation loan against a finish that does not raise resale value in proportion to its cost both share this property. The debt is real and fixed, while the thing securing it, in any economic sense, is already gone. The industries built around this category have no incentive to correct it, and there is no need to frame that as conspiracy. Auto manufacturers price luxury trims to maximize the gap between manufacturing cost and signaling value, not to minimize depreciation for the buyer. Lenders price financing on depreciating assets according to risk and return, not according to whether the buyer's broader optionality survives the loan term. Resale and consignment platforms profit precisely at the moment the original premium has evaporated and the buyer needs liquidity, which is the point in the cycle where they hold the most leverage and the seller holds the least. Every participant in this system is responding rationally to the incentives in front of them. The floor that traps households like Marcus's is not the product of any single actor's malice. It is the predictable output of several separately rational systems intersecting at the same purchase. Scale this further, and the pattern intersects with something closer to home for the audience watching this. The same income bracket that finances status objects most heavily is also the bracket least likely to maintain liquid emergency reserves proportional to its fixed obligations, precisely because the obligations themselves have already claimed the cash flow that reserves would otherwise occupy. The emergency fund and the status floor are competing for the same dollar, and in a culture where the status floor is visible and the emergency fund is not, the floor tends to win the allocation by default, not by deliberate choice. The reframe here is not that status purchases are inherently wrong, and it is not an argument for frugality as a moral position. It is a redefinition of what the purchase is actually buying. The conventional frame treats a status object as evidence of having arrived, proof visible to yourself and to others that the work has paid off. The more accurate frame treats it as a trade, status now in exchange for optionality later, and the trade is rarely priced honestly at the point of sale because the cost of the optionality loss does not show up on any receipt. It shows up later, in the specific moment you need to redirect money towards something the financing schedule did not anticipate: a parent's illness, a job change, a 6-month gap you did not plan for. What makes this trade dangerous is not its existence, it is its invisibility, while the bill is still being paid in small, regular installments that never individually feel like a crisis. A 4-figure car payment does not feel like the reason you cannot take unpaid leave. It only becomes that reason in combination with 2 or 3 similar commitments. At the exact moment something unplanned arrives and forces the math to be done, honestly for the first time in years. Optionality, the term planted earlier in the mechanism, is the actual currency being spent here, not money. Money is just the unit it happens to be denominated in. The capacity to change direction without first renegotiating your entire financial structure is what status purchases quietly convert into fixed obligations. And that capacity, once spent, does not return on the same schedule the marketing implied. The car does not have to be sold to recover it. The obligation has to end, and most financing structures are built to make sure that takes considerably longer than the signaling value lasted. Most people never run that calculation because nothing in the purchasing environment asks them to. The financing application calculates what you can afford monthly. It does not calculate what you lose the ability to do once that monthly number is locked in alongside everything else already claiming the same income. That gap between what you can technically afford and what you can still redirect if life requires it is the actual measure of financial freedom this category of spending erodes quietly, one reasonable purchase at a time. This does not mean every purchase in this category is a mistake. It means the actual price tag includes a number that is never printed on the receipt, the optionality forfeited for the length of the commitment, and that number deserves to sit alongside the sticker price before the financing is signed, not after. Status was never the thing you bought. It was the thing you traded away the right to change your mind about. The receipt never said so. If you added up every status purchase still sitting on a payment plan in your life right now, how much monthly optionality would you get back the day the last one is finally paid off? Not the cash, the room to move. Status spending doesn't just cost money. It costs the future choices that money could have bought. And once those choices are gone, they don't come back.